You what? All right, so where we're headed is human development and emotions. Like I said, I think I said, or maybe I didn't say in one of the classes, because hey, because sensations and perceptions wasn't of high interest in the class when we did that little survey in the, I think the second week or so. I decided just for the sake of time, if we don't get through everything else, we'll go back. If we get through everything else, we'll go back to sensations and perceptions at the end of the semester. But I wanted to focus on the topics that everyone was mostly interested in. So we're gonna skip sensation and what? My mic on here. This one. That's on mute. And so if we have time, we'll go back to sensations and perceptions and consciousness. But for now, we're going to go on with human development and then go into learning, cognition, social, personality, and abnormal. So that's kind of the goal. So again, I'm just going to summarize this, and then please go back to the video that does a little bit more detail. But the topic that we're interested in is human development, okay? And what sets human development separate from the other areas of psychology is that in most areas of psychology, when we do an experiment, we're taking just a snapshot in time, okay? And that is why when you're reading psychological papers and stuff, it's important to look at the demographics and the age group that the research is being done in, because it may not actually represent the entire population based on age, gender, race, and all those things. So it's important to look at that when you look at other psychological research. But what sets human development apart is we want to know how people change over time. So because while we probably all know that we're not the same person we were 5 years ago, we're not the same person from when we were little babies. We change and adapt over time, okay? And there is some things that I do just want to bring to attention. Most of the theories that we talk about have to do with child development, okay? And the reason behind that is that for a good part of even into the 20th century, psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists assumed that we stopped developing at the age of 18, that once we hit 18, there's nothing more, okay? But then with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and modern medicine and all that kind of stuff, our lifespan in about the last 120 years has doubled. Okay. And so what that did is it allowed people and professionals to kind of think, wow, there is more after the age of 18, okay? And we do continually to develop. And what I hope that you'll learn out of this is when you get old, you still have things to look forward to, okay? It's not all about you get to middle age and you're at your peak performance and then you start to decline. No, development is a lot more complex than that. And in fact, a lot of theorists are actually thinking that we actually live 2 lifetimes. Our first 0 to about 35 to 40, and then after that from 40 on, because what we're recognizing during this age group is this is when we have individuals who have the highest turnover rates with work. They're trying to discover a new work life. This is when we see a lot of middle-aged people go back to school. Believe it or not, this is also the time in life that has the highest divorce rate, okay? Because theorists kind of think that we're going through kind of another rebirth. into our world. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Question.
Okay. Is it true that some people mentally get, because of trauma, they mentally get stuck at that age sometimes? Because I've heard in research, and I've done research where, like, for example, if you had something like, I mean, really traumatic go on when you're 16, you can mentally get stuck at 16 for a while.
Yeah, so yes and no. Okay. About 25% of the population is susceptible to getting what's called post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least post-traumatic symptoms. The other 75% tend not to. Okay. And so dependent upon the level of trauma determines at what level a person can get stuck at. For some people, it could be a one-time event. And if they're within that 25%, they could mentally get stuck there. We find that children who have gone in and out of the foster care system and whatnot, they tend to stop to develop at around the age of 11 or 12. And then it's kind of like, I'm not going to say they stop developing, but what happens is it takes them a lot longer. So you'll have usually a 30-year-old who is still at the mental age of around 16 to 18. Okay. Now, one thing that does stop brain growth, though, is substance use. We find that if someone, for example, starts to drink really heavy at the age of 12, the brain stops developing at that point, and it doesn't progress anymore. It doesn't continue to develop. So, but I am talking about severe substance abuse, not the occasional go and party with your friend type of thing. We're talking individuals at the age of, 10 or 11 who are drinking heavily almost every day. Okay. And so the answer is yes and no. There's some people who can be very adaptive to trauma, and there's others that can't. An example is when I worked with individuals in a women's and children's crisis shelter. It happened to be two individuals in there at the same time. One of them had been severely raped for 12 or so hours and was severely beaten. She came to our shelter after spending like 6 weeks in the hospital. Then there was this other individual there that was getting out of a domestic violence relationship. Not saying that's not traumatic, it is, but it wasn't to the severity of that individual. She didn't end up in the hospital or anything. In fact, it was the police that said, "You're not staying home. You're going to go to a shelter," because she had young kids. But it's interesting because the female that had the severe trauma at that point, not a trauma symptom. She was okay. She was just waiting for her wounds to heal, and she was perfectly fine. Whereas the other lady, she could break a fingernail and go into a trauma response. Literally, she did that once, and really, I mean, end up in a fetal position and everything. Okay. And my point being is the susceptibility of trauma is really dependent on a person's experience. So the person who was through that violent encounter came from a home that stuff happened. That's what became predictable for her. The other lady, this was her first marriage, and she came from a very well-to-do family. They pampered her all the way through her life. And so after having that trauma happen to her, she would quickly be sent into a traumatic expense. So it just really depends, if that makes sense. So
I'm so sorry to add to that because isn't it has something to do with your frontal lobe? So that I think some people kind of has issues developing like those.
well, everyone's frontal lobe has problems. I'm going to just say that. I think it was in the biology video that our brain actually develops from the temporal lobe back into the front. And the frontal cortical area doesn't actually fully develop until we're around 26. Okay. And so that kind of so that frontal lobe, if you have a life of continued trauma and that kind of stuff, it can be affected. So yeah, it kind of has to do with that, but it also has to do with the person's developmental history. So, um, with that being said, because I know you're interested in psychiatry or something like that, who should really go on and take additional courses in human development? We have Site 240 here at TOCC. Is one, I'm going to recommend it to anyone who is going into counseling or social work. I will tell you that my colleagues that I went when I used to supervise social work and counselors, and I had some as colleagues. They usually had two books in their office. One was a diagnostic and statistic manual to code the person's disorder, and the second one was their human development book. Because you can't treat a 11-year-old the same way you would treat a 40-year-old. And so they often would go to their development book and read, okay, this is the cognitive level that they're at, the emotional level that they're at, and would tailor their treatment according to the developmental place that the person is in. Of course, I would recommend it to teachers, but if you're interested in nursing or the medical field, you should take a human development class. In fact, all three universities in Arizona, I know one's in Idaho and Montana, all require a human and growth development class before you can even get into the nursing program. So it's one of the prereqs to get into the program. So just some suggestions. So, all right. So what are we going to do for this class? And again, this will be a review. I'm not going to go into details about these. Is one, we study human development. We're really interested in three areas of development. Okay. Obviously, the biological processes. Okay. How our brain develops, how we develop physically, and all of those things, because those biological processes influence the other two, as you can say. And again, you know, I think I've mentioned this in this class before. Uh, Humans are kind of unique as a species, okay? Is that we're not actually born with fully developed brains. Our brains are underdeveloped. In fact, 90% of our brain grows between the age of 0 and 6, okay? Reason being is we're bipedal, and so the female, I can't think of the word, where the baby comes out. Oh my gosh. The vagina, we can call it the vagina, the birth canal, is limited in size, meaning that if a baby's brain got any bigger, it would get stuck trying to come out. So our brains are born underdeveloped, and then it grows after leaving mom. Okay. Why is that significant? Is because most of our development occurs in a socio-cultural context, not in the biological context of mother's womb, meaning that we are very much a social being, and the majority of our brain's growth happens outside of the biological womb of the mom. Most other species come out with all of their innate abilities, all of their ability to start, many animals are already walking within a few hours of birth, those types of things. So we're kind of unique in that, and we have one of the longest developmental periods. The other area that we are interested in is our socio-emotional area. So we know these all influence each other. So when we're talking about socio-emotional, we're talking about how we learn to understand our own emotions in relations to the social world. Okay, because that's how we learn about emotions. And then a cognitive processes obviously are how we think, how we develop thought processes, language, all of those kinds of exciting things. Okay. And we'll see that these are work all together to create our world. Okay. I'm going to skip this. So in the video, and I'm not going to spend, again, a lot of time on this because we kind of talked about this dude at the beginning of the semester, is Sigmund Freud. Okay, the reason we're going to start with him again is not only did he give us one of the first theories of personality and personality development, he gave us our first developmental theory, okay? And he's going to be our example of biological theory, okay? Reason being is that what Freud wanted to focus on is innate drives, things that we're all born with, okay? And as we mentioned in the beginning of the class, we're all born to reproduce and we're all born to protect and aggress, okay? And he's going to say, these are the biological processes that go across any human species, okay? And he's going to argue that this comes from our mental life. We're not aware of these drives. And so in his theory, most of what we do isn't because we are making the decision. It's our unconscious mind, okay? And that sits in, I don't know if it's in this one. Okay, there it is. This sits in what's called the id, these two primary drives, okay? But I'm going to kind of put it in Sigmund Freud's term of why we develop something called an ego, all right? If Sigmund Freud was in this class, so this isn't Dr. Peterson right at the moment because I don't know. If Dr. Freud was in this class, what he would say is you're not here to learn to be a better person, okay? You're not here to do self-improvement. No, you're sitting here with your cool pads, that nice glass, dressed nice, all this stuff, because you want to increase your probability of having sexual relationships with someone else at a later time within the class or on Zoom. That's what Sigmund Freud would say if we only were driven by our primary drives. What he would say too is that what would have happened when we came into class today, and it's hard to imagine this on Zoom, so you guys have to imagine being here in person, is what Freud would say is if we only had our id, we'd be trying to beat up the person next to us and have sex with the person on the other side, okay? So I told you he's weird. So what if you could imagine if that was it, we wouldn't have survived as a species very long. We would have been exterminated long ago. So what the id is it developed an ego. And the ego works on what's called the reality principle. It has access to the external world and it has access to the needs and the desires of the id. And its job is to satisfy the urges of the id while dealing with the external world in a socially appropriate way, okay? And so that's kind of his model, and he believed that all dysfunction, all health has to deal with this chaos that is occurring inside of us that we're not aware of. And based on that, he came up with what's called as psychosexual stages of development, okay? And just to kind of rehearse this, each of these stages is based upon some type of sensual need that we have at a given period of time of development. And I'm going to spell sensual according to how Freudians spell it. Sensual is Sexual, okay? So it's that satisfaction within that area. So the first area, of course, you could imagine is the oral area because we have to get sustenance in. So pleasure comes from the innate sucking reflex, okay? And so within this, he believed that you either kind of take control of that sensation or you let it control you. All right, hold on. It's okay. And so he believed if you got stuck in this phase, you became what's called orally fixated, okay? Freud himself thought he was orally fixated because he couldn't go a day after the age of 12 without smoking a cigar. And he actually died because of jaw cancer from cigar smoking. So what is orally fixated individuals? And according to Freudian theory, well, this is people who become addicts. These are people who become obese because you can't control the consumption process, okay? And so what about modern times though? Because, people think he's weird and everything with this, but um, there's a lot of nutritionists, medical people who believe that people are obese because they can't not stop eating. Okay. Which is scientifically invalidated. Okay. But this idea that the reason why some people become obese is because they can't control intake. Okay. If you believe that, you're one of Sigmund Freud's buddies, but that's kind of the oral phase. Okay. The second stage in review is around the age of 2 or 4. I really think we need to have like celebrations for this. I think, we usually celebrate, graduating from kindergarten, high school. No, I think we need to celebrate potty training. Okay. Because in the anal phase, which is the sensual area for this period, children are doing two things for the very first time. The first thing is they're giving into the demands of some authority figure, some parent saying, I'm not going to change you anymore. You need to do this. So they're giving into the demands of a social world. The other thing they're doing is taking biological control of their biology. They're saying, no, I'm not going to defecate or urinate right now. I'm going to wait till this time and this place. Okay. So we're taking internal control of biological processes. So what about anally fixated people? Well, this is, if you've ever called someone anal or you've been called anal, you'll understand why you have been called this now, because this is, again, a Freudian notion. Someone who is anally fixated is someone who wasn't able to take internal biological control of themselves, so they put excessive control on their environment. So this is a person who makes sure that their closet's perfect, that when they come into class, they make sure everybody is acting the way they should. They're that person who is when you're doing those group projects, who is constantly saying, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to do. This is someone who is anal. Oh, it's okay. Okay. So that's where that terminology actually came from. The next phase is the phallic phase. Okay. In this phase, the reason Freud put in this is that children at this age, and I'm going to qualify that in a minute, will naturally start touching themselves. Okay. And they'll touch themselves in places that have billions and billions of very sensitive nerve endings on it. And it feels good. All right. And so in the phallic phase, what the goal is to start to control that sensations that you're experiencing in your body. Okay. Now I do want to qualify this. Children touch them. With modern ultrasounds, children touch themselves in mom's womb. This is not a thing that just occurs between the age of 4 and 6. It's a natural thing. Now I will say, this is actually kind of good information to take with you, because there's a difference between child masturbation and adult masturbation. Child masturbation is you're touching yourself because it feels good. Adult masturbation is because you're having a fantasization of something. Okay. So when approaching a child with that and asking them why they're doing that, if they say it feels good, um, uh, you're probably okay. But if they say, oh, I'm fantasizing about Jill from school, that's when red flags should go up as moms and dads, because they've been taught that adult thought process somewhere along the line. Okay. So there's a good little parenting tip. Probably the weirdest thing about the phallic phase is Freud came up with what's called the Oedipus complex. I tell the story of this in the video. I'm not going to rehearse it here, but in the most basic version of it, this is where a boy tries to get the affection of the mother by replacing the father. Okay. Again, affection, sensual, is spelled Sexual in Sigmund Freud terms. Okay. And later on, Carl Jung added the electric complex, where the female wants to replace the mother for the father's affection. Okay. Now, this can be criticized over and over, but there is something Freud is getting out of this period of time. I don't think he needed to make it sexual though, because what we know about this age period is the importance of play, a specific type of play called role playing. This is where we see a fireman and we go and play fireman. We see astronaut Barbie and we go and try to be an astronaut. But we're also looking at mom and dad and we're going and playing house. We're playing mom and dad roles with our friends. And what we know about this stage is that those interactions, that play, actually builds much of what someone's personality is going to be. In fact, the best predictor of whether someone is going to go to college or not is their attitude towards education at the age of 5. Okay, that's the best predictor of whether someone will go to college or not, regardless of social economic status, regardless of first generation or anything else. That period is the best predictor. Well, so why does this support Freudian theory? And I want to make a qualification really quick, okay? I think single parents are amazing. They're amazing human beings. And so I don't want this to be taken wrong as single parents are all shouldn't be in existence, blah, blah, blah. But we have had subpopulations of single parents who, for example, a mother with a young boy is single and does not expose that young boy to male role models. Okay. And then we have had single fathers who have daughters and do not expose that young girl to female role models. And we have found that those individuals, when they become adults, have really, really hard time in relationships because they weren't able to practice and see how, for example, how conflict is resolved. They're not able to see how two adults that are of the opposite sex should be treating each other. Okay. So in those small examples of single parents, we have found that there is something about this idea that children need to be exposed to adults, both sexes, and so they see that interaction. Okay. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Now, I was reading from the oral phase, is that why babies use binkies?
Yes. Well, according to Freud.
According to Freud.
Yeah. We'll qualify that statement. And then the next two phases, so the latent period, this is the unfortunate one. He believed that nothing really developmentally happens at this point. We're just kind of learning the skills of life, writing, reading, all that kind of stuff. But nothing significantly happens between the age of about 6 to puberty. This has been unfortunate because this is the age group of childhood we know the least about, because he said that nothing really happens during this phase. And we're barely trying to catch up with these kiddos. And then after puberty, we get it into the genital phase where a person learns how to have appropriate adult relationships based upon those other 4 stages, if they went through those successfully. I should go back to the phallic stage. What if someone gets stuck in the phallic stage? According to Freud, they become sensation seekers, they become risk takers, high risk takers, and those kinds of individuals. So I should just mention that really quick. Okay. That's Freud's in summary. There's a much more detailed conversation in the video from Tuesday if you want to go back and review it, but that's kind of the basics of Freud. Okay. And again, he very much focused on the biological processes, if you notice. Okay. All right. And then this is kind of where the video from Tuesday ended with our next developmental theory. So Freud's is an example of biological theory. This theory is the cognitive model. This is their cognitive theory that we'll use to emphasize those 3 points. And it comes from, this is actually a very well-researched theory. We're going to make some qualifications about it. But this is from what Jean Piaget. Okay. And what he was interested in is how do children construct their world? How do we come about to know our life and how it exists and everything else? And just like Freud, he's going to develop what's called a stage theory, but he's going to come up with different tasks that children should be accomplishing as they move through each of these stages. So the video explains assimilation and accommodation. It's just the way we learn new information and how we adapt, whether we need to create a new category of something or we can adapt information into what we already know. That's on the focus of that last video. So what I want to do is focus on his stages, starting with birth and going up through again about the age of 18. So what Piaget believed is that the first stage of development is about being able to construct our world and coordinate sensory information and motor skills. So the ability to, for example, a bottle, being able to reach out, grab that bottle and take it to the baby's mouth. And it's about learning that you can explore and become mobile in the world. If moms know that when a child hits about 2, they're everywhere because they've coordinated their motor skills and they want to see what this world is all about. What Piaget felt is that in order to move to the next phase of development, you have to be able to keep things in your mind, okay? And he came up with a task called object permanence, okay? And the basic idea of object permanence, and I can kind of do it here in class, is let's say we have a little kid sitting right here, and we have his favorite teddy bear. And this represents a curtain of some type, okay? And so we put the little teddy bear in front of the little kiddo and he interacts with it, blah, blah, blah. And then right in front of the child, you take the teddy bear and you put it behind the screen. And you go, where does teddy bear go? Okay. And with the technologies at that time, he found that around 24 months, the kid goes, I have no freaking clue, kind of, if you want to put language into it. But then around 24 months of age, the little kid goes, you idiot, you put it behind the screen. Are you dumb or something? Okay. And so he felt that this was a transition phase because the infant was able to keep information, sensory information in their mind without the presence of that sense object. Okay. Now, is there something to object permanence? Yes, but we have found using better technologies, it develops at a much younger age than 24 months. It's actually around 5 to 6 months, I believe, that infants are able to get object permanence. But if anybody wants to be cruel to a babysitter and you don't mind your child being traumatized a little bit, if the child's under about 6 months of age and you take them to a babysitter and make it so that when the infant is there, all the clothes the infant is wearing is taken off and it's put in like some clothes that the babysitter washed or bought. You make sure you leave nothing such as your smell, pictures of you, blankies that have your smell on it, sights of you. I promise that will be the last time your babysitter will babysit for you because the infant thinks in its mind, if you think about it this way, mom no longer exists if I can't smell her, see her, and touch her. And so babysitters won't like you anymore. Anyways, but that's the idea behind object permanence. All right. So in the sensory, so when we go into the pre-operational phase, we're starting to symbolize everything. Okay. And thinking about the amount of symbolization that we do between the age of 0 and 6 to me, is mind-blowing. Because the average child by the age of 6 will know over 60,000 words. Okay, think about that. That's a lot of freaking words. Okay. But this is what's happening during this pre-operational phase as they're developing and they're experiencing and creating symbols for everything they're interacting with. Okay. Because of that, their world kind of becomes overwhelming. Okay. And so there's some marked things about the pre-operational phase, such as the inability to do irreversibility. So usually the younger the child is, if the child's toy breaks, they think it's broken forever. You can't put it back together. That's why they say during this age, it's important to do like blocks and Legos and stuff like that so they can understand that things can be reconstructed. Um, Centrism and egocentrism, that so much information is coming at them, they come to believe that the world is about them, that everything exists for their existence. This is when we have there's two stages in life when we are most egocentric. One is in the pre-operational phase, and then it's going to reappear in adolescence. Okay. And so, but we'll talk about that when we get to adolescence and why adolescents start to develop that egocentrism again. Okay. So if you can imagine, we have so much overwhelming information that we have to start to consolidate it. Okay. We have to start to do something with it. So we're going to start putting things into very concrete categories. Okay. But in order to do that, we have to understand a few things and kind of go over these really quick. So we have to be able to understand conservation, and we have to be able to not only symbolize things mentally, but mentally manipulate them. Okay. So Piaget came up with two kind of tasks. Okay. This will be the first one we'll talk about. The first one is a conservation task. Okay. And this is where this is an example. You can use clay, you could use whatever, but you have two beakers that are the same size. And then you have a third one that is of a different shape. Okay. And in the first two beakers, in this case, A and B, you put the same amount of liquid, and then you ask the child, do these have the same amount of liquid? Okay. And whether they're, 3 or 10, they'll say, yeah. Okay. And then in front of the child, you'll take that liquid and pour it into that different size cylinder. All right. And then you'll ask the child again, is there still the same amount of liquid? All right. Somewhere between the age of 6 and 7, the child will correctly respond, yes, it's just you put it in a different size cup. But normally, if you ask a child under the age of 6 or 7, they'll say that there's more or less liquid now. So the idea is not understanding the idea of conservation. So they're not able to mentally represent that just because the liquid changed shape, but it's still the same amount. Okay. I think there's a picture. No, there isn't. And then there is another task that Piaget did called the three mountain task. I always like to think of it. It's not. I like the other model. It's actually two trees and a mountain. But what Piaget would do is he'd have a table. Piaget or mom would sit on one side, and the child would sit on the other. And there'd be this, taller, lighter green. Then there'd be this little hill, and then there will be this more slender, darker tree on the other side. And Piaget would ask the child, "What do you see?" And most of the time, they'll say, "Well, I see this big one, I see the longer one, and then I see the darker one." Correct, right? And but then what Piaget would ask is, "What do I see?" And what usually a child under the age of 6 or 7 will repeat what they just said. They'll say, well, I see this lighter green tree, and then I see the mountain, and then I see the darker green tree on the other side. Okay. Somewhere around the age of 6 and 7, though, the child will say, well, I can never remember which one this is. Well, you see this taller green, dark green tree, then the hill, and then on the other side, you see the lighter green tree. Okay. Now, what does that require a child to do, though? It requires a child to hold that object in mind, rotate it 180 degrees, and see someone else's perspective. So what these two tasks suggested to Piaget is this is when a child can start to mentally manipulate their world and start to simplify all of those symbols that they have. Okay. Now, what this stage is, though, is marked by and the reason it's called concrete operations is that categories become very solidified and everything becomes very binary. So you have good guys, you have bad guys, you have black, you have white, and there's no other categories. Every category becomes very, very fixed. All right. And so again, if you ask, okay, well, anyways, I'll go on to the next one. So that's kind of the thought process during this period. And then we get into what he considered formal operations. And this was done more with a paper pencil test. Formal operations is being able to think in the abstract. Okay. And kind of my best example, as I mentioned, you have cops and you have prisoners, right? And in the concrete, prisoners are evil, cops are the good people. Okay. In the formal operations phase, you can come to realize that cops can be good people and they can be bad people. Prisoners can be bad people and they could be good people at the same time. And again, I go back to my prison experience. There were women there that did do wrong things, but they also had amazing qualities. A lot of them were excellent mothers, for example. Others were accountants, for example. And point being is that you're just not a villain or a hero, okay? That everything is, what do they say? There's no black and white, everything is a shade of gray, okay? And that's really what the formal operations phase is about, all right? All right, so that's his theory. It gets more stable when you get into stage 2, 3, and 4. But let's talk about some criticisms of Piaget's theory. One is what we've discovered about infants over the last about 20 years with better technologies and everything else. Because, and again, I think moms know this intuitively, and we're just figuring it out scientifically. But infants are much more complex and amazing than what we originally thought they were. If you think about Piaget's, they're kind of built in a black box, an empty box, right? But what we have found for some examples about infants, they actually make better statisticians than most statisticians. An infant can predict probability about 3 to 4 times better than the average adult. Probability being able to guess what direction something's going to head. Okay. That they're able to tell the difference, for example, the difference between good people and bad people as early as 3 months of age. Okay. And the simple example of this is the most simple research in this is when infants are not afraid of something, they'll do an approach behavior. They'll stare at something longer. If something is frightening to them, they'll try to look away and they'll try to get back into a fetal position. Okay. So the simple example is, and they used a lot more pictures and stuff, is just you present a child a picture of Martin Luther King versus Charles Manson. Okay. You show the picture of that stereotypical good person, the infant will do approach behaviors. You show them a stereotypical picture like Charles Manson of someone who's considered evil, they'll do withdraw behaviors. They'll try to get away from it. Okay. But unfortunately, this leaves the infant as they start to develop and they learn mom and dad's representation of good and evil. And so that's why we think we lose that ability sometimes to tell the difference between the two. So, but point being is we're not going to hit on a theory of morality, but it was once believed that infants are amoral. They don't understand the difference between bad and good, but obviously they do. And so they do better at math. They do better at telling the difference between people who are good for them and bad for them. And they have just much more of a complex world. It's really cool. So that's one criticism of Piaget's theory. The other criticism is when we look at it from a cross-cultural perspective, okay? Because what we find is that based on what the environment demands upon the individual will determine what stage of development they'll get to. And this is the criticism, because if you look at this, it looks like a step process, that stage 4 is better than stage 2, or stage 3 is better than stage 1, right? But what we have learned is that these stages really are more about our adaptability to an environment. Okay. So, for example, I'll compare two first world countries first, Germany and the United States. Okay. In the United States, only about, I think it's 10 to 15% of Americans make it to the formal operations phase. The majority of American citizens get to stage 3, meaning that we think in black and whites. Okay. Whereas in Germany, about 90% of their population makes it to the formal operation phase. Okay. And again, though, two first world countries, technology based, all that kind of stuff, what is the difference, right? Well, here in the United States, we're not pragmatists. What do I hear all the time? We're a society of laws and rules. And in order to navigate here in the United States, all you have to do is know which rules to uh, obey and which rules sometimes you can break. Okay. And that's all you need. All you really need, based on our environmental demands, is what to follow. Okay. Whereas in Germany, laws and stuff like that are loosely defined. Okay. Two people can steal, and dependent upon the situation that created that theft will determine the outcome for that person. If they did it for a moral reason, they're probably going to be let free. If they did it because they were aggressing towards the German people, they're probably going to get some jail time. Okay. And so they're much more what they call programmatic, that every situation doesn't demand the same solution. Okay. And so that's why they're more of a formal operation society. Now, what about people, for example, who have not been exposed to Western culture, such as individuals, tribes in the Amazon? Okay. Well, they make it to stage 2, because what you need to know in the Amazon is, for example, slight differences between symbols. Like, these plants look the same, but you better not eat one over the other. You have to remember trails and how to get to places. You have to remember where the best fishing hole is, for example, those kinds of things. But this is a thing. If you take, for example, individuals in stage 3 and stage 4 and put them in the middle of the Amazon, what are they going to do? They're going to get lost, killed, or maimed. And if you think about it, us here in stage 3 and 4, if we go to the Amazon, we need to take our boats, our guns, our electronics, our GPS, our fireplaces, our food, and usually they'll have an Amazon tribe member as a guide. Okay. And so my point being is that that environment gave them the ultimate level of development, because anyone in those quote unquote higher stages, according to Piaget, couldn't exist there. And that's why I want everyone to think of this as not a progressive thing, but at what demand did the environment put on the individual determines what level that is necessary for their survival. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that is Piaget. Clay. All right. I want to just start the socio-emotional model because it's usually split and it usually takes more than one class. So I'm just going to spend just a last few minutes of this class, just try to get through like the first two stages of what's called Erickson's psychosocial theory. Okay. Erickson's unique. He did come out from the psychoanalysis Freudian area where he felt that at different stages of development, um, um, we have some type of crisis we need to overcome based on where we are in our developmental phase of existence. Okay. What's unique about Erickson is he's our first lifespan model. He's the first one who took us to the end of life with his model. Okay. So, but based on this, I'm just going to take you through the first two stages and then we'll be done for tonight. Okay. So what are we learning? Oh, one other thing. I'm going to present this as he did. So either you develop trust or develop mistrust in our first stage. And the thing that I want you all to think about it though is I want you to think about these as a continuum, that we all lie on the continuum between complete trust or complete mistrust. Okay. An example being, we're going to see that this has to do with the interaction with the primary caregiver in this case. And I will say, I'm not a perfect human being. Sometimes I did excellent with my son, and sometimes I know I messed up. Okay. So I know I'm hoping my son is more towards the trust end of life, but I know he's somewhere on that continuum. And so I just want you to think about that as I go through this model. Okay. All right. So infancy. One of the things we know about infants between about 0 to 1.5 to 2 is that they're completely dependent on someone else. Okay. They're dependent on someone for food, warmth, comfort, taking care of their biological needs. And, you know, I don't know many infants that can change their own diaper, for example. Okay. So they're completely dependent on someone else. So this is a perfect phase in life to learn whether you can trust people or mistrust people. Okay. So I'm going to come run through the example of trust and then I'll give an example of mistrust. Okay. So how does a child develop trust? All right. It's basically about the responsiveness between the infant and the caregiver. So I'm going to use moms because I think moms are cool and we'll use, let's use should we do baby boy? Will that work? All right. We'll call him Billy. All right. So mom and Billy. Billy cries. Mom shows up, changes Billy. And then I don't know. Do we have moms in here? No, not yet. I hope not. Well, people on Zoom that are moms understand this. You go in and let's say you go in and you feed little Billy, and then there's this moment where you smile at Billy and Billy smiles back. And we call this the infant caregiver dance. There's this moment of reciprocation for the event that just took place. All right. So in this example, again, Billy cries, mom shows up, changes Billy. They have the mother-child dance. A little bit longer, Billy cries, mom shows up, feeds Billy, and they have that reciprocal moment, and so on. And every time mom shows up, takes care of Billy, and then they take care of each other. Okay. What is Billy learning is that he is able to trust other people as long as he's part of that relationship, part of that reciprocation. Okay. And so what he's learning is trust. All right. So that's on one end. Now, mistrust. So last time I did this, I did it for my developmental class, and I was in my office, and they came and knocked on my door to make sure everything's okay. So my point is, I'm about to get really loud, okay? But what I want you to listen to is not the words that I'm saying. I want you to listen to the emotion, all right? Because our first language is emotions. Infants are actually, I didn't mention this earlier, infants are better at understanding emotions than we are as adults, okay? And so I want you to pay attention to the emotion that is conveyed, right? So in the mistrust end, we have Billy cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, no one shows up. Billy cries, mom comes in and goes, "What do you need now? I'm trying to watch my shows. You keep crying. Why can't you just be quiet?" All right, you heard the words, but did you feel the emotion? What do you think Billy is learning in that situation? Distrust, mistrust, right? He's saying, I can't rely on other people. And when other people show up, they're angry, they're frustrated. And so I must be a frustration to that individual. Therefore, I can't rely on them and they can't rely on me. Okay. And so that's the extreme end of mistrust. And if you think about a lot of infants who tended to be very neglectful, they tended to be not paid attention to a lot in infancy, we see these patterns of aggression and anger going through their life. Okay. But remember, I'm hoping we're all on this other side of trust, but we're all on this continuum. Okay, let's finish though with the next phase of development. Okay. So in the next phase, we're thinking, 1.5, 3 or 4 years of age, and what are we doing during this time period? Okay. Well, what we're doing is we're developing exploration, right? What are these kids doing? They're exploring their world. They're trying to figure this place out. All right. And again, what are things that they're learning? Well, and again, we'll use a behavioral example. Is on the healthy end, an infant or child can develop what's called autonomy. Autonomy being the ability to go explore the world, but to feel safe while doing it. So the autonomous child is going to end up being that child in the next phase who goes, hey, let's go play, or let's go explore, or let's go do this, okay? Or they're going to develop shame and doubt, okay? And I want you to think about this between now and next classes. I want you to think, what is the difference between shame and guilt? You don't have to answer that question now, but that's my challenge or my homework for you over this next week. But we're going to talk about shame. Shame is feeling constantly that you're unable to do something. You feel bad for everything you do. And so you develop doubt about whether you should be behaving or not. Okay. So what does healthy autonomy look like? And we're going to expand that infant mother dance that was occurring earlier in infancy. Because what healthy autonomy looks like is little Billy goes to his room, plays for 10, 15 minutes, and then he goes to the kitchen and says, hey, mom, I'm here. You're looking good. Take care. And then they go back and play for another 10, 15 minutes. And then they come back and say, hey, mom, it's almost lunchtime. What you thinking about? And then they go back and play for 10, 15. What are they doing in this situation? Is they're freely exploring and then they're reinforcing the relationship with what's known as their secure base to make sure that everything will be okay just in case I have a problem in my exploring. I've reinforced that relationship. Okay. What about on the shame and doubt? This is a situation where, again, the child has been very mistreated, and this mistreatment continues into this early childhood area. And so in this situation, this is where an infant becomes, I don't know if this is the right term, but over attached to the caregiver. They're constantly there, kind of that child that is constantly wrapped around mom's leg. And it's not because the child is necessarily happy. You can actually see the anxiety in the child's face that what happens if I get separated from this individual. Or it's the child that, we're getting to be, 5 hours and everybody says, hey, has anyone seen Billy? No, I haven't seen him. And they go look for him and they find him like 5 blocks down in some neighbor's house, just having a good old time taking care of his own business. So in this kind of situation, either the child becomes afraid of being detached because that parent is so unpredictable. They're not sure what they should be doing, or they're basically saying, screw you. I can't deal with you. You're not going to be part of this. I'm going to go do my own thing. Okay. And again, we're all on a continuum on that. But with that being said, let me stop sharing and stop recording.